Hello. Okay, it's recording. Uh, Gwen again, and this is the second video in the series I am doing on self-care. And last time I talked to you about our nervous systems and the importance of soothing our nervous systems and what all, and I gave you a couple of little exercises that you can do to help calm and soothe your nervous system, things that you can do just anywhere, anytime. And today I wanted to talk about boundaries and boundaries as self-care. On the open office hours call that I just had this morning, on the day I'm recording this, we talked about boundaries, and we had a really rich discussion about boundaries and what they are and what they aren't, and how we can honor them and how we don't, and maybe some of the whys of why we don't. Um, and uh, and I wanted to talk in this video a little bit about really emphasizing the complexity of our boundaries and how it's not they aren't they aren't something that's really simple for us to just know and just connect to and just honor and all the time, right? um, Often we have boundaries uh, that we don't even really know we have, or we don't understand why we're getting upset about something when a boundary is being crossed, because we aren't really aware that that's what's happening. We're just aware that we're getting irritated or agitated or annoyed or anxious, or however we're reacting, and that we have a really strong no, but we don't really know why, and it doesn't really make sense to us. And so our boundaries are really, they're tied into our own personal histories, right? For those of us who have trauma and complex trauma, we have a pretty sensitive sensory system that will pick up on things that it thinks are danger, which may not be. And so we can get what's called triggered pretty easily, and that shows up too when boundaries are being crossed, because we are extra sensitive to that boundary crossing because we had been violated in such a profound way, and therefore causing the trauma impact that we have. And there's that. Having a trauma history informs how and where our boundaries are, how we were treated as kids, if we were allowed to have boundaries ourselves, how our parents modeled boundaries or didn't, right? And other caregivers, not just parents, grandparents, teachers, pastors, anyone in a caregiving role in our lives. Um, and then there's media, right? And for those of us who were born long before social media existed, there was still magazines, there's still the news, there's still TV shows, sitcoms. I remember a show called, oh shit, what was it called? Excuse me. I think it's called Three's Company. I think that's what it was called, but it was two women and a man lived together in an apartment, and there was, it was supposed to be funny. And I recently watched an episode, or part of an episode, on YouTube, because I was like, oh, anyways, doesn't matter why. And let me tell you, they were crossing boundaries all over the damn place, and it was marked as humorous, right? That it was funny, to disregard another person's autonomy and independence, and their no, that was humorous. And so there's a million ways that we get messages about our boundaries, about what they are, about what they should be, about whether or not we can speak up about them. Um, and and so it is a complex idea to unravel. One of the things that I deeply believe, and I always want to make clear, is that I believe boundaries are very fluid, and that what is a boundary today may not be a boundary tomorrow. What is a boundary in this moment with this person may not be in this next moment with another person, or even with the same person, right? Um, and that there really aren't any hard and fast rules of what should or should not be a boundary for each of us individually, because it is totally based on what we are comfortable with, what allows us to still be our autonomous self and also be in relationship with another person, right? Because boundaries are about relationship. They're about, as the quote on at the beginning of the email that this is part of, and at the top of the blog post that this is part of, says, a boundary defines where I end and another person begins, right? It's this, or however, whatever makes that visual happen. And so what may be a really strong, solid boundary for me in my life and with the people I'm in relationship with may not be a boundary for another person. And that's okay, right? With the caveat that it's okay if we are all being conscious and aware of what our boundary is and why it is. And we don't always know the answer to that, which is part of the being curious and asking ourselves, right? And yet, right, I don't want us to just be giving in to all the things all the time. And also, we need to notice if we're having knee-jerk reactions of no, 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 no all the time, right? Because it's both. I could share a million different stories of times when I have consciously and intentionally chosen not to defend a boundary. Most of them have to do with my kids. One story that I can tell really quickly is when my daughter was little, she loved playing with Barbies. When I was a kid, I loved playing with Barbies. As an adult, not so much. But she would always ask me to play with her, to play Barbies with her specifically. And I hated it. Oh, I hated it. And I would find any excuse and any way to avoid Barbies. And what I realized at some point in her growing up, was that she was getting the message that mommy just didn't want to play with her, right? That it wasn't about Barbies, it was about her. And that wasn't a message that I wanted her to have. So instead of having this firm boundary of I don't want to play Barbies, right? I decided, okay, we'll set a timer for 15 minutes and I'll play Barbies. Now that's a pretty innocuous, sort of boundary, and a pretty innocuous story about how I just disregarded it. Like, okay, I'm going to play Barbies because my relationship with my daughter is far more important than me digging my heels in of, I don't want to play Barbies, right? And this is true of all our relationships. It can be our relationships with our intimate partners, with our close friends, with our not so close friends, with our parents, with our children, with our siblings, right? All of these things. There are times when we will consciously choose, for the sake of relationship, to not defend some boundary that comes up, right? Now, of course, there's always a flip side. There's all the flip sides, right? The flip side of that is that if we are always not defending our boundaries, if we're always giving in to the other person, then there is a question about the integrity of that relationship, right? That's another conversation. And there are plenty of times when we can decide that we're not gonna stick to our no for whatever reasons. And there's nothing wrong with that either, right? It's both. We get to have both. What is important, in my opinion, is if we are being true to ourselves, right? if we are honoring who we are as the individual, right? And if our relationship is more important than not playing Barbies, for example, or our relationship is more important than really digging our heels in about what restaurant we're going to for dinner, right? Or, right, there's a long list, right, of these sort of things. Now, there's also boundaries that I'm pretty clear on, right? I don't let my son, who's 3, hit me or bite me or kick me, right? That's a no. And there is no time or place when that's okay, right? Except when we're play fighting. But that's different, right? I'm talking about when he's like angry and frustrated and he's lashing out. That's a real clear boundary of no. We all have some very clear boundaries of no and what is allowed and what isn't allowed. And we all also have a lot of very murky boundaries that it depends. Or we don't even know that they're really there until it comes up, right? And we're suddenly reacting to something and we're not real clear why. So our work in this self-care circle that starts in just a couple weeks is on being able to really connect physiologically to our boundaries, because our body will tell us when a boundary is being encroached upon. And be that a physical boundary, an emotional boundary, or a psychological boundary, we will have a physiological response. And so connecting to that physiological response and allowing ourselves to then become curious about it and figuring out, okay, what is this about? And is this about something that happened like when I was 4, or is this about this moment now? Is this about something that I believe about myself or I believe about the other person? Or is this really about this thing, right? And being able to start getting curious and unraveling and exploring what all that is. Because there is no, in my experience in life, there aren't many, maybe it's a more accurate statement, there aren't many real either ors in life. Most of life is about both and, right? And so our work, I believe, as individuals and as community, is in figuring out those both ands and how to be able to live together with them, right? Live together within ourselves and then live together in greater community. So that's all for today. I'll be back in a week with the 3rd and final video in this series, and I hope you enjoy them.